I've never been the type to get spooked easily. Sure, I lived alone, but I love my space. That said, the first text came in around 11:45 p.m. on a Tuesday, and it seemed harmless enough. "Hey, do you still want the tickets?" I assumed it was a wrong number and ignored it. Simple mistake, right? The next night, it happened again. "Hey Emily, did you get my message about the tickets?" This time the text mentioned my name. Weird, but still, I figured it was a coincidence. Maybe someone had the wrong Emily. I didn't think much of it and blocked the number. Case closed, or so I thought. The text didn't stop. A new number popped up the following night. "Why are you ignoring me, Emily?" I blocked it again, but there was this uneasy feeling creeping in. Then it started getting personal. "Was that mac and cheese for dinner?" I froze. I had made mac and cheese. How could anyone know that? I brushed it off as a fluke, thinking it had to be some prank. I was probably overthinking it. But as the days went on, the texts became more specific, more intrusive. "Your red dress looked nice today." That's when I started to panic. I had worn a red dress earlier at work. This wasn't just someone messing around anymore, someone was watching me. I went to the phone company, asked if they could track the numbers. They said the numbers were all disconnected or untraceable. That didn't make any sense, though. How could I be getting messages from numbers that weren't in service? The rep told me it was probably a glitch, but glitches don't know your daily schedule. A few nights later, the phone rang at midnight. It wasn't a text this time, someone was calling. The number was private, but I answered out of instinct. There was no hello, just breathing. It was this shallow, rhythmic breathing that sent a chill down my spine. I hung up immediately. I wish I could say that was the end of it, but it wasn't. The calls kept coming. The texts grew more threatening, more invasive. One message stuck with me. "You're running out of time, Emily." I blocked every number, contacted the phone company again, even tried to get the police involved, but nothing worked. One night I got brave, or stupid, and answered the call. This time there was something more. Distorted voices, almost garbled, but I could make out some words. "So close. You can't hide." I slammed the phone down, my heart racing. Sleep didn't come that night. I sat up, clutching my phone, watching the minutes tick by. There was a part of me that wanted to just throw the phone out, get rid of it completely. But I needed to know. I needed to understand what was happening. When I spoke to the phone company again, they confirmed the worst. Every single number that had called me, disconnected. Some had been out of service for years. Then came the final message that shook me to my core. "Turn around, Emily." I was sitting in my living room when I got that text. Alone. The TV was on, but I wasn't paying attention anymore. The second I read it, my stomach dropped. Every hair on my body stood up. I didn't want to look. I didn't want to believe someone was behind me, watching me. But I had to. Slowly, I turned my head. My breath caught in my throat. No one was there. But the feeling lingered, that cold, heavy weight pressing on my chest like I wasn't alone. I bolted upstairs and locked myself in my bedroom, shaking uncontrollably. The calls, the texts, they didn't stop. But I did. I stopped replying, stopped blocking numbers. I just let them come, hoping that, eventually, it would all go away. Maybe they would lose interest. Maybe it was all a sick joke that would fade with time. Weeks passed and it finally started to slow down. The messages became less frequent, but the damage was done. I didn't feel safe anymore. Not in my own house, not in public. Wherever I went, I felt like I was being watched, followed. I moved apartments, got a new phone number, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't matter. Because whoever or whatever was behind those calls wasn't done with me. It started small, so small I could almost convince myself it wasn't happening. Almost. The first time I noticed, I was brushing my teeth. Just a normal night in front of the bathroom mirror, half asleep, going through the motions. When I leaned down to spit, I glanced up and saw it. My reflection was a split second behind me, delayed, like a glitch on an old video stream. I blinked a few times, rubbed my eyes, and it was gone. Back to normal. I didn't think much of it. I was tired, probably just seeing things, but the next morning it happened again. I reached for the faucet, and my reflection lagged for just a second, then caught up. It wasn't much, just a fraction of a moment, but it was enough to send a chill down my spine. Maybe I was imagining it. Maybe it was the lighting. I could explain it away. Days went by, and I started to forget about it. Life went on, and I stopped paying attention. That was until one night, getting ready for bed, I noticed something I couldn't brush off so easily. My reflection didn't lag this time. It moved faster than me. I was still leaning over the sink, but my reflection had already straightened up. It was like watching a bad special effect in a horror movie, only this wasn't some cheap trick. It was real, and it was happening right in front of me. I stepped back from the mirror, trying to calm the creeping fear rising in my chest. Maybe it was just exhaustion. I'd been working long hours, stressed out with barely any sleep. I was probably seeing things, but then it got worse. It wasn't just the lag anymore. My reflection started doing things I wasn't doing. It would smile when I wasn't, or wave when I was perfectly still. And it wasn't just subtle anymore, it was obvious, like it wanted me to notice, like it was waiting for me to react. One evening, I stood in front of the mirror, determined to prove it was all in my head. I moved my hands slowly, back and forth, watching carefully. For a moment, everything seemed normal. But then it happened. My reflection, instead of mirroring my movements, raised its hand and pressed it against the glass. I froze, my heart pounding. I wasn't touching the mirror, but my reflection was. It stared at me with a strange intensity, like it was waiting for me to acknowledge it. I backed away slowly, never taking my eyes off the mirror. As I did, my reflection's expression twisted into a grin, a sick, mocking smile that I definitely wasn't making. I could feel the terror rising in my throat, and I stumbled out of the bathroom, slamming the door behind me. For days I avoided the mirror. Every time I passed by it, I felt this overwhelming urge to look, but I couldn't. I couldn't bear the thought of seeing it again, of seeing whatever that thing was. But curiosity got the best of me. One night, I couldn't help it. I had to know. I turned the bathroom light on and stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. For a few moments, everything seemed fine, normal. But then, out of nowhere, my reflection moved on its own. Slowly, deliberately. It leaned forward, pressing its face closer to the glass, while I stood frozen in place. And then it whispered, its voice faint but unmistakable. "I'm coming." I couldn't move. My body was paralyzed with fear as I watched it press harder against the mirror, its hand sliding across the glass, leaving a faint smudge. My heart raced, and I finally snapped out of my trance, backing away as quickly as I could. But no matter how far I stepped back, my reflection stayed close to the glass, watching me with that same twisted smile. That night, I covered every mirror in the house. Sheets, towels, anything I could find. I couldn't bear to look anymore. But even with the mirrors covered, I still felt it, like something was watching me, lurking just beyond the surface, waiting for the moment I'd slip up and uncover the mirror again. And then the dreams started. In the dreams, I was standing in front of the bathroom mirror, but instead of my reflection staring back, it was that thing. Only this time, it wasn't trapped behind the glass. It was free, standing beside me, grinning. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, heart pounding, but the fear stayed with me long after the dream faded. I don't know how much longer I can take this. Every day it feels like the thing in the mirror is getting stronger, closer. The mirrors are still covered, but I can hear it at night. The faint sound of tapping, like fingernails against glass coming from the bathroom. I'm terrified to uncover the mirrors again, but I'm more terrified of what might happen if I don't. I've worked late in the office more times than I care to admit. With deadlines constantly looming and projects piling up, it just seemed like a given that I'd be one of the last people to leave each night. At first, I didn't mind it. The quiet was nice, and it gave me time to focus without the usual office chatter in the background. But over the last few weeks, things have changed. It started with the cold. Not the usual kind of cold you expect from an overactive air conditioner, but something different. The first time it happened, I was sitting at my desk going through reports when a sudden chill ran up my spine. You know that feeling when someone opens a window in the dead of winter and you feel the sharp, icy air hit the back of your neck? That's what it felt like, except there were no windows open. The office was completely sealed. I brushed it off at first. I was probably just tired, maybe a little too immersed in my work. But then it happened again, and again. Every time it was the same. A cold spot just behind me, like someone was standing too close. Close enough that I could feel their breath on the back of my neck. Except when I'd turn around, there was nothing. No one. Just the empty office, dimly lit by the glow of my computer screen. I tried to ignore it. Told myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me from spending too many hours cooped up in the same space. But then it got worse. One night, as I was finishing up some emails, I felt it again. The cold. This time, it wasn't just a fleeting sensation. It lingered, the temperature dropping rapidly around my desk. I pulled my sweater tighter, but it didn't help. Then I felt it. A hand. Cold like ice, brushed against the back of my neck. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. My hand shot up instinctively, but there was nothing there. No one. The office was still empty. I should have left right then and there, but I didn't. I told myself I was imagining things. After all, there were no security alerts. No one had come in. It was just stress. That's what I told myself. But the next day when I woke up, I saw it. A faint red mark on the back of my neck. It looked like fingers. The imprint of a hand, cold and firm. My stomach turned. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe I'd scratched myself in my sleep, or maybe it was just a weird reaction to something. But I couldn't shake the feeling that it was connected to whatever I'd felt the night before. Over the next week, the cold spots became more frequent. Sometimes I'd feel a chill run down my spine. Other times, the air around me would turn frigid like I'd stepped into a freezer. And it wasn't just the cold anymore. I started feeling watched, like there were eyes on me, just out of sight, waiting. I began asking around the office, trying to see if anyone else had experienced anything strange. Most people laughed it off, saying it was just the building's ancient HVAC system acting up again. But one night, as I was leaving, the janitor, an older man named Greg, pulled me aside. "You've been staying late a lot, haven't you?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. I nodded, curious but wary. "Be careful," he said. "You ever hear about what happened to the others?" I blinked. The others? Used to be a few more people like you. Stayed late, always working into the night. They're not here anymore. I laughed it off, thinking he was just trying to spook me. But there was something in his eyes, something serious that made me stop. I pressed him for details, and reluctantly, he told me about the others, about how they'd all complained of cold spots just like I had, and about how one by one they'd all died suddenly. Heart attacks, strokes, accidents that didn't quite make sense, and all of them had the same marks, red impressions on their skin, like they'd been touched by something cold. I left the office that night with a pit in my stomach. I tried not to think about what Greg had said, but it was impossible. The marks on my neck hadn't gone away, and each day I'd find new ones. On my arms, my back, my legs. Always faint, but always there. I started dreading the cold spots, bracing myself for that icy touch every time I sat at my desk. Then, last night, it happened. I was alone, working late again, when the temperature dropped so suddenly that my breath fogged in front of me. The lights flickered, and the office went completely silent. That's when I felt it, the cold, pressing in on me from all sides. I stood up, heart pounding, and that's when I saw them. Handprints, dozens of them, pressed against the windows, the walls, the desk. Everywhere I looked, there were marks, icy red impressions that hadn't been there moments before. I grabbed my bag, ready to bolt, but as I turned to leave, I felt the cold hand grip my shoulder. Hard. I screamed, ripping myself away and running for the door. But as I reached the hallway, the lights flickered again, and I saw them. Shadowy figures, just out of reach, watching me. I don't remember how I made it out of the building. I just know I ran faster than I ever have in my life. When I got home, I locked every door, covered every mirror, and turned every light on. But I can still feel it. That cold, icy grip. And the worst part? The marks haven't stopped. Every morning I find new ones, like fingers tracing patterns across my skin. I haven't gone back to the office since that night, but I know it doesn't matter. It's chosen me, and I can feel it getting closer. You ever get that feeling like someone's following you? Not in the paranoid turn around and check the crowd kind of way, but more like someone's out there, living your life in a way you can't quite explain. It started small, and honestly, if I hadn't pieced it all together, I might have shrugged it off as a weird coincidence. One day I'm grabbing coffee at this spot I always go to before work, and the barista, a guy I see every morning, gives me this confused look. "Didn't you just leave?" he asks, glancing over his shoulder like he expects me to explain the joke. I laughed it off, thought he must have confused me with some other guy. But then he gets all serious, like, really serious. "No, man, like, 2 minutes ago. You were here. Same jacket, same coffee. You even waved." I didn't wave at anyone. I didn't leave and come back. Hell, I hadn't even been to the coffee shop that week. But what are you supposed to say to that? So I laughed again, shook my head, and said, "Guess I've got a twin out there." But that wasn't the end of it. Over the next few weeks, friends, co-workers, hell, even my neighbor, started mentioning these coincidental run-ins. My co-worker, Mike, swore up and down that I had been at this bar on Friday night. The same Friday night when I was laid up at home, half asleep on the couch, binge-watching some dumb reality show. "You were there, dude," Mike said, looking at me like I was the crazy one. "Wearing that same jacket you always wear. You even nodded at me across the room. I tried to come over, but you slipped out before I could say anything." I hadn't gone anywhere that night. But what was I supposed to do? Argue with him? Tell him he imagined it? I brushed it off, muttering something about him drinking too much, but it left a weird knot in my stomach. Things escalated after that. Every few days someone would mention seeing me somewhere I hadn't been. Parks, restaurants, even on the other side of the city. The reports were all eerily similar. Same clothes, same haircut, same me. Except it wasn't me. I knew that much. It wasn't until I saw it for myself that I started to get really freaked out. It was a Wednesday. I was on my lunch break, just walking around downtown to clear my head. I turned the corner, and there, about 20 feet away, was a guy standing in front of the bakery I like to go to sometimes. He was facing the window, hands in his pockets, just standing there. He was wearing my jacket. And not just some similar-looking jacket, but the exact same one I'd bought a few months ago. Same scuffed elbow, same torn pocket. He even had on the same sneakers. And when I say he looked like me, I mean, he looked exactly like me. My stomach dropped. I stood there, frozen, staring at this guy who was me but wasn't. My brain was scrambling, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Maybe I was losing it. Maybe I was just overtired or stressed. I started walking toward him, trying to get a closer look. As I got closer, he turned, just slightly, like he was aware of me, like he knew I was there the whole time. And that's when I saw his face. It was my face. Same stubble. Same tired eyes. Same blank expression. I felt like I was looking in a mirror, except the mirror was standing outside a bakery on a busy street. I froze. He stared right back at me, and then, without a word, he turned and walked away. Calm, unhurried, just casually strolling down the street like nothing was wrong. I wanted to shout. I wanted to run after him, but my legs wouldn't move, and my throat had gone dry. I don't even remember how long I stood there, but by the time I finally snapped out of it, he was gone. After that, I became obsessed. I started going to the places where people claimed they'd seen me, bars, parks, stores, hoping to catch another glimpse of him, of me. I needed to know who or what this thing was, but I never found him. Not at first. Then last week I saw him again. I was at the grocery store just trying to pick up some things after work. And there at the end of the aisle was my doppelganger. Same jacket, same clothes, he was just standing there staring at me. This time I didn't hesitate. I marched down the aisle, ready to confront him, to demand answers. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice echoing in the mostly empty store. He didn't move. He just stood there watching me. As I got closer, I realized something was off, more off than just seeing a double of myself. His eyes weren't just tired like mine. They were wrong. Dark, hollow, like there was nothing behind them. His lips curled into a slow, deliberate smile. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. But my heart was pounding so hard I could barely hear my own words. He didn't answer. Instead, he took a step closer, close enough that I could see the small scar on his chin, the same scar I'd had since I was a kid. He took another step, and then another, until we were standing face to face. And that's when he spoke. "It's almost time." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Time for what?" His smile widened. "Time to trade places." I stumbled back, my mind racing. I turned to run, but when I looked back, he was gone. Just like that. No footsteps, no sign of where he'd gone. Just empty space where he'd stood. I haven't seen him since, but I know he's still out there. Watching, waiting. And the worst part? I don't know what he's waiting for. But every time I leave my apartment, every time I catch my reflection in a window, I wonder if it's still me. You ever have one of those moments where you swear you're losing it? Where something so strange, so out of place happens that you're convinced your mind is playing tricks on you? That's how it started for me. Small things at first. Little items showing up in my apartment that I hadn't seen in years. I remember the first one vividly. I'd come home after a long day at work, just ready to collapse on the couch, when I noticed it sitting on the kitchen counter. $1. A tiny worn-out doll with matted hair and scuffed cheeks. One I hadn't seen since I was maybe 6 or 7 years old. Her name was Maggie, my favorite doll as a kid. I stared at her for a long moment, trying to piece together how she could have ended up there. "Mom must have left it," I said out loud, though the words felt hollow. It didn't make sense. My mom hadn't been to my apartment in months. Still, it was the only explanation that seemed remotely plausible. I called her later that evening. I didn't want to sound paranoid, so I casually mentioned the doll. Asked her if she'd maybe dropped by while I was at work and left it for me as a little surprise. "Sweetie, I haven't been by," she said, her voice puzzled. "Why would I leave you an old doll?" I laughed it off, said I must have forgotten bringing it from her place. But deep down, a nagging feeling had settled in. I hadn't seen Maggie in decades. How could I have brought it with me? Days passed and I tried to forget about it, but then more things started to appear. First, it was my old school notebooks. I found them scattered across my living room floor one night, pages flipped open to random assignments I'd written in middle school. The handwriting was unmistakably mine, awkward, messy scrawl from when I was 12. But I hadn't kept these notebooks. They'd been tossed out years ago. Another time, I came home to find a pair of shoes I hadn't worn since high school sitting by the door. The soles were worn down, the laces frayed, just as I'd remembered them. It was the same pair I'd worn on the day of my first major heartbreak, when I'd walked home for hours in the rain after being dumped at the homecoming dance. I felt sick just looking at them. At first, I thought someone was messing with me. I started locking my doors and windows obsessively, convinced that someone, maybe a friend with a twisted sense of humor, was sneaking in while I was gone. But every time I checked the locks, they were secure. Nothing was ever out of place except for the items. It wasn't until the photographs appeared that I realized something was seriously wrong. I found them one morning, laid out neatly on my bed. Black and white photos, curled at the edges, of my childhood home. My bedroom, to be exact. In the pictures, you could see the faded wallpaper, the shelves lined with stuffed animals, the same ones I hadn't seen in years. But it wasn't the room itself that terrified me. It was the fact that these photos were taken from the perspective of someone standing outside my window. Someone had been watching me as a child. I dropped the photos and backed away, my heart racing. I hadn't lived in that house for over 20 years. Who could have taken these pictures? And how had they ended up in my apartment? That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of my old bedroom window, the curtains fluttering in the breeze, the darkness outside, hiding whoever had been watching me all those years ago. The next morning, I decided to confront my mom again. I needed answers, anything that could explain what was happening. "Mom, are you sure you haven't been to my apartment?" "Haven't dropped anything off?" I asked, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "Sweetie, I haven't been near your place," she insisted. "What's going on?" I told her about the photos, about the old toys and clothes showing up, about the memories that I'd long buried resurfacing, one object at a time. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then her voice dropped, barely above a whisper. "You've never told anyone about those things, have you?" "What? No, why would I?" I replied, confused. "The photos, the toys, those memories, they weren't just painful for you, they were for me too." She hesitated before continuing. "I never wanted to talk about it, but there were incidents when you were young. Things I couldn't explain. Objects would go missing from your room, only to reappear in strange places. You used to tell me that someone was watching you through the window at night, but I always thought it was just your imagination." My heart sank. I had vague memories of telling her those things as a child, but I'd chalked it up to nightmares, to the overactive imagination of a kid. Now, hearing her confirm it, I realized there had always been something off, something lurking just out of sight, pulling at the edges of my reality. "I think, whatever it was, it's back," I whispered. The final straw came a few days later. I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of something falling in the living room. Groggy and disoriented, I stumbled out of bed and made my way down the hallway. There on the floor was my old teddy bear, the one I'd clung to as a child during thunderstorms, the one that had been burned in a house fire when I was 9. It wasn't possible. The bear was gone, destroyed. And yet, there it was, singed around the edges, smelling faintly of smoke. I knelt down, my hands trembling as I picked it up. That's when I saw the note tucked inside its paw. Written in the same scrawl I'd seen in my childhood notebooks, the message was clear. "You can't run from the past." I dropped the bear and backed away, a wave of nausea washing over me. It wasn't just objects from my past that were haunting me. It was something deeper, something that had always been there, lurking beneath the surface. And now, it wanted me to remember. Every painful moment, every forgotten fear. The past wasn't just following me, it was living in my apartment, and I had no idea how to stop it.